work for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife in Region 2, not at the headquarters office. I work on lake and stream bed alteration agreements, but that's not my only job. I do a lot of other things. This is the region where I work. I've been there over 6-7 years, something like that. Before that, I pretty much worked in all 17 counties while working for CDFW, doing various things, CISA, CEQA, LSA, the NCCP. Don't know those acronyms, you can look them up. I'm kind of briefly going to go over the mission, the LSA program intent and overview, the activation, the compensatory mitigation and opportunities for partnership. I was only going to talk about LSA and the process with LSA and the routine maintenance agreements, but I heard that maybe you guys just aren't interested in that. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about how get funding for some of the projects that you want to do around creeks through the LSA program. So what is the mission of the department? Well, we want to manage fish and wildlife resources, the plants, and the key note here is that it's for, so it's not just for, hey, we love the environment, it's for the use of that environment. Now, Fish and Game Code 1600 was enacted in 1961. The intent of the program is to protect and conserve fish and wildlife resources. Now, a lot of people, if you're involved at all, you look at an LSA and you say, hey, it's only about bed, bank, and channel. And there's been a lot of grumbles in the last couple of years about how CDFW is taking jurisdiction over more things. I want you to remember this point, is that the intent of the 1600 code is to protect, conserve, and conserve the fish and wildlife resources. So we're not talking bed, bank, and channel. We're talking about the fish and the wildlife. And here's the 1600 code. I really want you to note that it says activity. So you will notify prior to commencing any activity. So 1600 jurisdiction. The core says we have a wetland delineation manual. If you're over here, you're outside of the wetland. If you're here, you're in the wetland. 1600 doesn't say that. It talks about activities. We don't talk about jurisdiction. So even though a lot of people have passed around this bed, bank, and channel and riparian habitat, not what the 1600's intent is. So when you do any of these activities, and I want you to look at the very bottom one, because a lot of people focus on the top two, of just divert or obstruct or change or use the material within the stream. Deposit or dispose of debris, waste, other materials where it may into any river, stream, or lake. Okay, let's think about that. Now, as I said before, it was enacted in 1961. A lot of grumbles recently about what CDFW is doing, what we're requiring for permits. So the language and the intent of the code has not changed there since 1961, but a couple of things have changed. Originally, back in the day, wardens used to just go out, you needed a permit, he would have a carbon copy on the hood of his truck and he'd write you a permit. He's a law enforcement officer. Now, we have people with my biology degree. I call myself a wildlife biologist with knowledge of environmental policy and regulations. You have us writing the permits. Maybe 2 decades ago, there were 4 people in the entire region, 17 counties, issuing these permits. 4 people. Now we have, so definitely an increase in staff critically looking at these 1600 permits and how it's impacting the environment. CEQA. So since 1961, CEQA was enacted. We have to comply with CEQA as well. So that's another layer. The biological resources have changed. Vernal pools are definitely marine habitat more aware. We have more endangered species. And the scientific data and tools have definitely improved. I use Google Earth all the time. I love the historical imagery. That's what I look at. I don't necessarily always have to go on a site visit, but I have tools on hand that I can use on a regular basis. And it's all these changes that have occurred that people say, oh, well, you've changed the LSA program. No, we are better implementing the intent of that program. So really, we're looking at activities, not areas. And when someone really wants you to focus on where does that water flow? What are the habitats there? What are all of your activities? A lot of people just want to give me a little itty bitty tidbit of this is the bridge I'm building. Whereas there's so many things that go involved in that bridge. Where are the utilities? Where are your staging areas? How are you getting access to that area? Or they have a large development project and they're really only showing me one culvert, where you're grading an entire site that has some sort of connectivity to the stream. And I'll get into more details about that. So when we are issuing an agreement, we really look at how is it affecting the fish and wildlife resources. That is the mission of the department. That is the intent of the code. I want you to just take a quick note because not many people know this. Fish doesn't mean fish, like as we all know fish. Fish means an invertebrate. It means a mollusk. The Fish and Game Code, this is how they define fish. It's a crustacean, an invertebrate, an amphibian. An amphibian. Who would have thought an amphibian? According to Fish and Game Code, it is. Okay, so this is not a CDFW graphic, but I just wanted to point out we all know the stream system, it can move about. If we don't have all these dams built on our streams, the stream channel actually changes. We have flood events. It floods up a floodplain. There may not always be the beautiful canopy of riparian vegetation that we associate with an LSA program. It may just be a grassy swale. But would it require a notification under 1600? Maybe. So when people notify for we have a different definition of project. So we have different definitions for all sorts of things. Our definition of project is each individual activity that may obstruct the flow, may dispose of debris. So let's say there's a big developer going in, he's a lot of land, and he's building a bridge. That's one project. He's putting in a culvert down here. That's another project. And then he's mass grading. That's another project. And so all these different habitats, because they're all connected to the stream, they may affect those fish and wildlife resources at that site. And so our authority is not about this is the jurisdictional area, this is the ordinary high water mark, this is the hard line that we're drawing. It's to implement the mission and to implement the intent of the code. So we're really looking at activities, not at currently there's no defined terms within the code. I'm hearing that may change soon, so you may want to be on the lookout for that. But a lot of people ask, well, what is the definition of substantial? How are you substantially diverting? The CDFW is just taking jurisdiction over all of these things, and the substantial is. Well, when working on these 1600 permits, we're looking at the local level. What is happening on this individual stream system where your project is occurring? And is it substantial to the fish and wildlife resources at that particular location? So it's really not focused on that regional programs in place that look at a regional scale. The 1600 is really focusing on that individual site location and the impacts associated with this. Getting your 1600 permit, a lot of people wait till the last minute. They said, according to the code, you have 90 days to give me a permit, so I'm going to wait 90 days before I need that permit to submit it. This is where we run into so many bumps in the road. Notify early. Send in that notification as soon as you have some idea of what your project is going to be, because we don't want to hold up your project. We need to be a part of that planning phase. The Corps, the Water Board, they all get involved early, and we're just left at the very end saying, hey, we still need that. We already covered all this mitigation with the Corps and with the Water Board. Well, that may not be the case. So what's a little different about 1600 than with the Corps or the Water Board? Well, we have a lot of flexibility. So there's no mitigation rule like the Corps has saying you have to go to a bank or you have to do permittee. It's pretty much left up to interpretation. We don't have anything written in code, and it's kind of a good thing that we don't. Also, under the Endangered Species Act, we have certain guidelines that we have to abide by when issuing a permit, an incidental take permit for an endangered species. We have to have a conservation easement, an endowment, all these things to show it. 1600 doesn't have that. So there's sort of a potential to do this out-of-kind mitigation. And it's really eye-opening for me to come to this conference because I'm a biologist. I'm not involved in a lot of stormwater things. So it's really interesting to see the different things that can be put in place to protect the streams. And again, we're focusing on this local site-specific, not a regional scale. And I briefly want to go over the types of mitigation that can be included in the 1600. It can be on-site. That's sort of the more traditional route. When I talk to developers, and I talk to them a lot, and as well as city and county staff, Caltrans, we don't want to do on-site mitigation. We don't have room. And their go-to is, oh, we want to mitigate through a mitigation bank, but there's no credits available, so we can't do that. So we're at the end, right before you need to develop your project. The birds are going to be nesting there soon. You need to get in now to me for a permit. Well, there's no mitigation in place because we're looking at all the activities that could affect these fish and wildlife resources, not just the bed bank and channel. And yet you don't have mitigation for it. So there's a bit of an issue. And a lot of people have come up to me and said, including city and county staff, so-and-so nonprofit over here is doing a project. Can we give money to them? Of course you can. Well, CDFW staff, why don't you track that? Why don't you, connect the dots and say, hey, the permittee over here needs mitigation. Why don't you track all the restoration and everything that's happening with all these and track it all and bring the two together? Well, for a number of reasons, staffing included, we can't do that. Also, it becomes like an ethical issue. I can't show favoritism towards one entity versus another. So there's a lot of things that can happen that just, what I'm sort of hoping to get across to you today is that we can't do it. Maybe somebody out there can. And also, when someone is developing a project, I think they forget to think outside of the box. Well, we just don't need restoration. We could use invasive species removal. How about picking up all that plastic that's left in the stream system? All of those things can be mitigation for those fish and wildlife resources. And because we don't have these standard guidelines of what mitigation is for an LSA, we can think outside of the box. Of course, it all depends on what's on your site. So if you have riparian habitat and you just want to pick up some garbage to mitigate for impacting a half acre of that pristine riparian habitat, that's probably not going to work. So we really have to think out about what the impact is to those fish and wildlife resources when we think about the mitigation. Now, there's all sorts of planning tools out there, shed plans. I've been working on the Habitat Conservation Plan and Natural Community Conservation Plan for Placer County. There's websites available that show barriers to fish movement, where we could be connecting habitats, general plans, and what sort of sparked me we wrote a routine maintenance agreement for the city of Roseville. And in that plan, there is a habitat mitigation and monitoring plan. Well, the city of Roseville is special. They already wanted to do all this wonderful environmental stuff of removing invasives and planting, native trees and picking up the garbage. And if you're doing all this maintenance work and you want to do all these good things too, that can be your mitigation for all the maintenance work that you're doing. So we were able to get across to them that, yes, we're requiring this mitigation. We want you to pick up the trash. We want you to remove those invasives. And maybe you can get funding because it's required under your permit to do those things. So as I said before, a lot of these permittees find it very difficult to find a mitigation that they need to implement their project, especially if a bank or an in lieu fee program isn't available. We've been asked to connect with these people, but we're definitely not allowed to do that and don't have the staffing to do that. So really, there's definitely nonprofits out there who want to do good things. And they can really connect with the cities and counties, with the permittees, with Caltrans in implementing those projects to their impacts under an LSA. Some of the examples that were used, we had a project that came to us, development project. The consultant knew of a fish restoration nonprofit that already had a project in mind. Basically, that developer just handed them a check and said, here, do to implement that project. So it was a small impact to a stream, but they were able to remove a fish barrier and plant riparian canopy cover for fish along that same stream range. So some of the take-home points: the intent of the Fish and Game Code is the protection of the fish. The mitigation options can definitely be creative. Of course, it depends on the resources present and who you're working with, but it doesn't have to be the standard restoration. There's so many different opportunities to mitigate through an LSA permit. And although we felt this local impact, our permitting process may be used to reach these regional goals. The goals within your watershed plan, the goals within the HCP, NCCP, and not only just to restore habitat for the sake of the environment, but if you want to do on-site restoration, do it because when your residents move in, they want to see a beautiful stream system. They want to walk by and they want to hear the birds chirping and they want to see the fish in the stream. So it's not just benefiting you as far as mitigation for your project, but it's benefiting the residents there as well. So with that, information at our regional office. I have cards if you would like. I am only assigned to Placer County, so I'm not really speaking for all the other counties. And I do have a heavy workload working on CEQA, CISA, LSA, NCCP program, the ILF program, so many things going on. And I know it was mentioned before that, hey, CDFW wardens need to get out there and issue more violations for all the wrong that is happening to our stream systems. Violations take a lot of time, and it's not just the warden that has to deal with it. I have to deal with it as well. Just get a permit ahead of time instead of getting a violation after the fact. So with that, I'll leave it to questions.
I know we have a question already because I see her. I see her.
See the eyes? I saw the eyes.
So you're saying that through nonprofits or other activities that nonprofits use that as part of the mitigation bank, that a nonprofit wouldn't have to be in a formal mitigation bank structure for that to transpire?
So I was the mitigation bank coordinator for Region 2. We definitely want to support our mitigation banking program. I'm not saying that. I'm a project where you already have the plans drawn out and for restoration or anything that you want to do, for mitigation, and you have a project. And all you would like to do is say, hey, we want to implement this project. That can be used to mitigate for that one project. Not that you build a ration site and therefore you have credits to sell off. I'm not saying that.
Well, don't we true up at the end of the year anyway, though, off all that, when we go through in a mitigation bank? I guess another question I have is, so do you have to verify these projects through some mechanism, and that mechanism is a verification request form, right? That project, because what we are creating is a mitigation banks because we true up through the Habitat Mitigation Management Plan or the routine maintenance agreement at the end of a designated time period.
So the routine maintenance agreement is a special deal because that's yeah.
Okay.
So if you're talking about just a straight permitting, a one-time project and need a one-time, mitigation for it,
I see.
yes. The routine maintenance agreement, generally speaking, is a long-term agreement, so it's greater than 10 years. It's for the regular routine maintenance at the same locations over and over again, and so it's a little bit different than just a regular 1600. So
You've got jurisdictions in the Sacramento, Placer, American River Basin.
Yes.
Is that not correct?
Yes, and so their habitat mitigation and monitoring plan for that routine maintenance agreement, you could call it credits. They're doing a number of things to mitigate the maintenance projects that they have.
Okay. All right, thank you. But we do have to notify up ahead of time using a verification request form to get approval for that project, though. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Oh, make sure you turn.
Angela, I know I've asked you this question before, but I'm going to ask it again just to see if I really understand. So a lot of times when there are settlement mitigation requirements like you're talking about, we, as a nonprofit, we have to find some way to get the organization that has to do the mitigation or has to provide the settlement to that, as opposed to just sending some cash to an off-site bank. And that can be a real problem for us. And I'm just curious if you have any insights about that for us.
So a lot of entities just really want to send that money. They want to send that money to that mitigation bank and say, I'm not to do anything else. Because the LSA program doesn't have the rules and regulations that our CISA program or with the feds and their mitigation, there's a lot more flexibility. So because I get a lot of the problem, they haven't organized with anybody to see what sort of mitigation is out there. And because I, as a state worker, don't know all the nonprofits out there and what their plans are to do whatever it is they're doing, they could be doing wonderful, wonderful things, and I don't know. And yet those projects could be used to development projects, whether it's city and county, Caltrans, developers, etc. It could be Joe Schmo who just wants to put a bridge to get to his house as well. I mean, there's a number of opportunities that this could occur. The key is that nonprofit needs to have that detailed out. We can't just say, oh, I'm going to give X amount of money and call it done with because I'm providing this nonprofit, $5,000. No, it has to implement a project, and we need to see that there is a project in mind where that money is going to. So in the instance where I had a developer give X amount of money to a fish restoration nonprofit, they already had a project in mind. And so that money was used to buy the plants. It was used to get the equipment to put in the... It was a one-page document. It was a written one-page document, and you wouldn't believe the things that I get that come in my permitting office. It's fine. I get hand-drawn things, like just anything, just a box, and this is the stream, and that's what I get. So anything will do. We like to see mitigation. We like to see improvements on the ground for those fish and wildlife resources. Of course, if you're doing a lot of things and you're saying it's in the name of improving this fish habitat, we better know what you're talking about. Next to the stream that have no place being there. There needs to be some sort of performance standard saying a year or 5 years later that it's done something good. Yes.
Thanks.
So is it clear now that we can do
So
partnerships?
it just sounds like they're...
Yes. Somebody needs to go out there and make some money by connecting the dots. It's not going to be me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yay! So, Angela, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Okay, so we have our next speaker.